This tutorial is I'm going to discuss how to paint reflections on different materials and understand how the reflection works. It can be on the environment or some simple reflective object that you have. Without any further ado, let's begin the tutorial. Before we start, you have to look on reference when studying, but in my case, since I have a little bit of skill on 3D, I use it as my advantage. Though 3D render isn't always accurate, but at least it gave us an idea on how light bends. And this is enough since I have the control of the environment. If you don't know how to 3D, that is fine. I can help you find actual things you need for reference. From what I've discussed for the past about how to color the skin, I discussed about how light affects the skin. This can also be applied to everything, literally everything. Any light from our surroundings affects the objects in it. That's also a thing for reflection. Basically, a reflection is just a light from the surroundings, because technically, light is equal to visibility. Without visibility, there's no light, hence the darkness. But reflections behave differently depending on the material of the objects. So let's start with the glossiness. Normally, if we paint a glossy object, let's say this sphere, we tend to add a specular highlight, but not really including the other reflections. This dot is basically a reflection of the light itself. This will become blurry if the object isn't too shiny, or it will become square if the light source was square, like a window. But what happens to the light from its surroundings? The reflection. It's supposed to be there, but subtle. In glossy reflection, dark tones are semi-transparent to transparent, so that means the black will be the original color of the object. Now, how do we get that type of effect in simplest way possible? You can easily do that using a blending modes. Change the blending mode of the reflection into lighten. Then this will become your basis of the color of the object with its reflection. And you can adjust the opacity if needed. Or if you think that the reflection isn't that accurate, tweaking the levels will do the trick, making the light colors a less brighter and dark tone to be more darker based on reference. Now make the light source as the brightest and add some bloom effects to it to give an impression of brightness. And well, that's it. But of course, that's the reason we needed reference. It doesn't always appear to be perfect right away, and this is the time we can use our artistic skills to make it better. And also, the thing about reflectivity on non-metal, color black material is a perfect canvas for reflections, like marble or tiles. It will just absorb the light of the surroundings, and so lighten blending mode works perfectly. But for the reflections of metal, it rendered differently. For a metal reflection, it's just how mirror works, the exact reflection of environment. Though reflection doesn't always have to be sharp, non-glossy metal appears to have a blurry reflection. But if the metal has a color, it became a little complex. As what you see in my reference, the brightest color is still white but having a glow of yellow, while the black stays black but with a subtle shade of the object's color. There's no one trick effect could do this, but I made some way for it. So the way I do it is a mix of multiply and glow dodge. Keep the image of multiply as it is. But for the glow dodge, you have to reduce its luminosity to -50 by going to edit, tonal correction, and hue saturation luminosity. And reduce the opacity to 50%. Now to make it more accurate, you gotta paint glow dodge on top of the layer to get the glow effects on bright areas. You can do the same thing on blurry reflections. Another thought about reflections: when it becomes less reflective, the farther the object, the lesser it will be absorbed. Great example here is that dark furniture and the reflection. Since it is far, it won't be absorbed that much. Now we're gonna talk about how reflection bends in curvy objects such as sphere and cylinders. At first I thought it should look the same, but it's actually different. The sphere is simple. If you know about 5-point perspective or fisheye perspective, that's basically it, but with some little modification. This is the environment reflectivity bounces. When viewing on top, this is the area where you can see the 90-degree angle reflection from the environment. So in front view, it should be around here. That is why in this 3D reference, you can see the ball here where I placed them exactly 90 degree of the sphere, and the rest of the space is from the back. However, cylinder is a little different. Reflection of the 90-degree angle is still the same, but the perspective we're gonna use aren't the same as the sphere, though a little similar. To make it easier to understand, it's just like stretch 4-point perspective and just add more of it, overlapping half to each. Then the reflection will stretch or unstretch depending on how close you are to the object. This is similar to the curtain holder that I have. Now those are just the basic usage of reflection. Using those methods like the blending modes, things will get easier from here when we apply it to our artwork. So how does it work when applied on glass reflection? Well, it is actually the same with the non-metal reflection. Dark tones is transparent if you remember. Let's have some example here. A cafe scene in a broad daylight. This is the art without reflection, and this is the reflection. Masking is very helpful in this situation since I only want the reflection to be on the glass. To do the masking, you gotta make a selection onto the glass area. Then click the create layer mask icon to create a mask. This will keep the other areas hidden but without entirely deleting it. By pressing shift click to the mask layer, you will temporarily disable the mask and reveal the entire painting of the canvas. Then you change the blending modes of the reflection into lighten and lessen the opacity if needed since reflectivity depends on glass material. But screen blending mode could also work, in fact might be better since it wouldn't make the color mixture less natural. During the broad daylight, reflection is very clear that it will cover the indoor lighting because daylight is stronger than any artificial light we have. That's also the reason why whenever we check what's inside a glass window, we tend to cover it with our hands. Glass is a canvas for lights, so whichever the brighter wins the visibility. So during nighttime, since outside is much more darker than the lights inside a cafe, you can see more what's indoor than the reflection came from outdoor. But once you turn off the lights indoor, the reflection will be very visible. Reflection is just an extension of sight. Think of it as an opposite world, upside down. It's like a window to the other world. In normal point of view, it's easier to paint the reflection. What you only need to do is to duplicate what's above the horizon and turn it upside down. But since it is an extension of sight, you'll be able to focus either the reflection or the real world perspective. This could also be a thing on glass windows. If you're focusing what's inside the building, the reflection will blur, or the other way around. Here's a real-life example photograph. I can focus to my PC reflection, or focus what's inside the PC. Now let's continue to the water reflection. As we mentioned earlier, reflection is an extension of sight, a duplicate of the real world. So if you look from above, you'll be able to see what's underneath of the reflected object or person. And also, reflection on water works the same as the glass, but the difference is light reflection on water is much more weaker than mirror or any other glass. You'll also be able to see the abyss if there's a shade above it, like a tree's shadow on reflection. But the question in this artwork, where's the cast shadow on the water? There's a tree above it, and by the looks of it, there's also light which it should create a cast shadow from a tree. And the lily pads has shadows. Like what I've said earlier, that reflection is just a light, so if there's a reflection, there's a light. Therefore, there'll be no shadow. The only time you'll be seeing shadow on water is when the water is foggy, like a flood. The cast shadow didn't actually form on the water, it forms on what's inside the water, the small particles that made the water brown. That's also why on a crystal clear water, like boat will look like it's floating because the shadow just went straight to the ground. However, there's no unlimited vision underwater, even how clear it is. So at the far end, it would still be foggy. Then the reflection would form since water would look darker from afar. That's it for this tutorial. Making a reflection effect is simple, though you really have to understand how the light works and the way it bounces, and I hope you learned something about that in here. So thanks for watching, and have a good day.